Hello, 5th graders, and welcome to a read-aloud of today's ELA story, this being our fourth and final story that we'll be reading together that features the great detective Sherlock Holmes. Having now read The Red-Headed League, The Blue Carbuncle, and The Six Napoleons, we'll be finishing our Sherlock Holmes unit by looking at the final story, The Adventure of the Three Students. Now, what makes this story unique among the ones we've looked at is that this one is actually going to be written in the form of a short 3-act play. So we'll start out by listing off the characters we'll see in this play. We've got Sherlock Holmes, of course, 40 years old, a detective. Dr. John Watson, 42, Holmes's assistant. Mr. Hilton Soames, age 55, a professor of Greek. Bannister, 63, Soames's butler. And the three students, as indicated in the title, are Giles Gilchrist, 20 years old, Dalit Roz, 19 years old, and Miles McLaren, 20 years old. So who are these three students and what do they have to do with a Sherlock Holmes case? Let's take a look and get started together with the story. Remember, this one is put in the form of a play, so there will be some stage directions, so I'll be reading those as well. Starting off with how the stage is set. At center, a desk and a chair both face downstage. Slightly to their left and upstage is a window along the back wall. There is a small table under the window with another chair next to it. This is the office of a professor at Pembroke College, Oxford University, circa 1895. To the right of the desk is a door frame, the door inside it open, that leads to the professor's bedroom. The bedroom also has a window along the back wall, though this one is obscured by large hanging curtains. The foot of a bed can be seen at the far right, upstage. At right, far downstage, are two comfortable chairs that face one another. Act 1. Lights up. At rise, Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson sit in the two chairs downstage right. Watson's legs are crossed, and he reads a book. Holmes also has a book in his hand, but he promptly closes it. His left leg bounces with nervous energy as his eyes scan his way this way and that. He readjusts himself in his seat, opens the book momentarily, and then closes it again with some agitation. The noise captures the attention of Dr. Watson, who looks up from his reading. Watson. Having a relaxing evening? Holmes. Very funny, Watson. You know I can't stand to be away from London for this long. Watson checks his pocket watch. Watson. We've been gone for precisely 21 hours. Holmes. Quite long enough, if you ask me. Watson. Here I shall remind you that you were the one who said you needed to come to Oxford to do some research. Holmes. Indeed, and the sooner I can finish it, the better. I've never been quite so dreadfully bored in all my life. Watson. No offense taken. Holmes. Oh, come now, Watson. You know I wasn't talking about your company. It's just that these university towns are so calm, so tame. Watson. Many people enjoy university towns for that exact reason. Holmes. Well, I am not many people. Watson. That much is certain. There is a sound of a knock at the door off stage. Holmes. Come in, and please bring with you some kind of excitement. Mr. Soames now enters from the right. Mr. Soames was the professor of Greek, or like the college teacher who teaches Greek. He is a tall man with wild hair and a nervous energy that keeps him in near constant motion. Watson and Holmes both stand to greet him. Soames. I beg your pardon, Mr. Holmes. Dr. Watson, perhaps you remember me? Professor Hilton Soames? Watson and Soames shake hands. Watson. Of course, Professor Soames. Good to see you again. Holmes, Professor Soames and I knew one another in the army. Soames. Many years ago, I heard today from the librarian that you and Mr. Holmes were in town to do some research, and I realize now how lucky I am to have you both here in Oxford at this moment. Holmes. Why is that, Professor? Soames. Because, Mr. Holmes, I need your help. Holmes. My help? Soames. Yes, you see, there's been a rather painful incident at Pembroke College this afternoon, and I'm not sure what to do. Your expertise is well known, and I thought I might beg you to use your talents to help solve a mystery. Holmes. If a crime has been committed, call the police. I'm only in Oxford for a few days, and I really desire no distractions. Soames. I understand, Mr. Holmes. Honestly, I do. But I'm afraid I cannot call the police, for no crime has been committed. Not yet. Further, bringing the police into the matter can only lead to scandal. Holmes cocks his head to the side, intrigued. He sits again and crosses his legs. Holmes. Scandal, you say? Well, congratulations, Professor. You've captured my interest. Please tell me how I might help. Soames. Oh, thank you, Mr. Holmes. I shall tell you as briefly as possible. Please feel free to interrupt. Holmes. To ask questions as needed. Yes, please begin. Soames. Yes, very well. First, I must explain that my subject is Greek, and I'm giving a big exam tomorrow. The student who scores highest on the exam will win the Fortescue Scholarship. Watson. Very prestigious. Soames. And very valuable. The student who wins it will have next year's tuition entirely paid by the Fortescue Foundation. Holmes. Quite generous. For those who don't know, tuition is the money that you have to spend to be able to afford college. And college can be quite expensive. So whoever gets the highest score on this exam apparently will have their entire year of college next year paid for. So, a very good prize. Soames. Yes, and a major part of the exam involves the students translating a long passage from Homer's Iliad. Indeed, the passage I selected takes up the first 3 sheets of the exam. Of course, no one knows which passage I've chosen until they receive the test. Holmes. So that no one can prepare in advance. Thus you must strive to keep hidden the 3 pages of the exam on which the passage is printed. Soames. You understand precisely. Holmes. Continue. Soames. Well, this afternoon I left those pages with the passage on them rolled up in my desk. Yet this evening, when I returned to my office, I found these 3 pages unrolled and separated, lying in differing places in the room, one on the floor, one on the table under the window, and one on my desk where I'd left it. Watson. Did anyone else have access to the room while you were away? Soames. Only my servant, Bannister, who has looked after my room for 10 years. He has always proven to be a good and honest man, and I trust him entirely. Holmes. Had he been in your office while you were out? Soames. He had, but only briefly. He entered around 5 o'clock to ask if I wanted tea. When he saw I wasn't there, he left immediately. Watson. And you know this because you already spoke to him about the incident? Soames. Yes, he was the first person I called upon when I discovered the papers strewn about my office. Holmes. And how did Bannister, the honest and trustworthy servant, react when you told him that the exam papers had been tampered with? Soames. He nearly fainted. He collapsed in a chair, and I left to get him some water. Holmes. I see. Did you find any other clues, Professor? Soames. Yes, a few. On the table by my window were several shreds of a sharpened pencil and a broken tip of lead. Apparently the culprit copied the passage so quickly that he broke his pencil point and had to sharpen it. Holmes, smiling. Our cheater was in a hurry. An excellent observation, Professor. Soames. Thank you, Mr. Holmes. Also, the table by the window has a fine surface of red leather. It was smooth and unstained this morning, but now it has a cut in it about 3 inches long. Holmes. Wonderful. Soames. Finally, on that same table, I found a small ball of black dough or clay, with specks of something that looked like sawdust. I don't know what it is, but I know it must have come into my office with whomever copied the papers. Holmes. Fantastic. Professor Soames, you have done me a great service. Soames. I have? Holmes. Yes, you have relieved me of the crippling boredom brought by my brief stay in this dreadfully dull town. And so, to repay you, I shall look to solve this mystery quickly and discreetly. Soames. Oh, thank you, Mr. Holmes. Holmes stands again. Holmes. Dr. Watson, what say you and I go have a look at the scene of the crime? Watson. Let's go. All 3 exit right. Lights down. Act 2. Lights up. Soames, Holmes, and Watson enter the office from the left. Holmes takes a moment to look around. He examines the desk and the chair first. Then he walks over to the window to look at the table and chair there and stare out through the glass. He picks something off the table. Soames. Do you see the rip in the table there, Mr. Holmes? Holmes. I do, Professor. And this is the black dough or clay that you spoke of earlier? Holmes holds something up in his hand. Soames. That's it. Holmes. There's another piece of it here under the chair. Holmes reaches down and picks up a second clump of clay from the floor. He pockets both. Holmes. How high is this window from the ground? Soames. 6 feet, but it has long been painted shut. No one could have opened it to gain access to my office. So the window is locked. You can see through it, but it's locked. Holmes. I see. And did anyone visit your office and see the papers on the desk? Before you left and they were disturbed, I mean. Soames. Yes, there are 3 students whose rooms are above me in this building. One of them, a young man named Darlet Ross, stopped by this morning to ask what time the examination began. Watson. And might he have seen the papers then? Soames. Maybe, but they were rolled up. He could not have known that they contained the passage that would appear on the exam. Holmes. Perhaps. But you may have suspected. After all, I don't see any of the papers rolled up on your desk. Soames. That's true. Holmes. So it's possible that, seeing the only rolled-up papers in your office, he suspected that they were confidential. Using logic, he may have reasoned that, with the test coming up tomorrow, the rolled-up papers contained part of the exam. Soames. I suppose you're right. My goodness, the rumours of your towering intellect were not exaggerated. Holmes. There will be ample time for flattering me and my intellect later, Professor. Right now I'm interested in your servant, Bannister. Did he know that the rolled-up papers contained the passage for the exam? Soames. No, I'm the only one who knew. Holmes. You said that when you told him, he felt faint and sat in a chair. Which chair? Soames. The one near the window. Holmes. I see. Well, what happened is quite clear. The guilty party came in, took the papers, sheet by sheet, from your desk. He brought them to this table by the window. That way, he could keep watch. If you approached across the courtyard outside, he would see you and could then escape. Soames. Except that would not have worked, for I entered from the other side of the building. He would not have been able to see me from that window. Holmes. Ah, that's good. So he copied what he could while you were gone, keeping a lookout, but then had to retreat fast when he heard you opening the door. That's why he didn't have time to place the papers back on your desk. Watson. Or roll up his pencil shavings or the pencil point. Holmes. Exactly. Professor, you didn't see anyone in the office when you entered, correct? Soames. Correct. Holmes, pointing to the bedroom doorway. And this doorway? Soames. Leads to my bedroom, but there is no way out of the bedroom except through the office. Holmes. Interesting. There is no window in the bedroom? Soames. There is, but it is also painted closed, meaning it can't be opened. Watson. So how could the cheater have escaped? Holmes. Patience, Watson. We're getting there. Professor, when you came in and saw the papers had been moved, what did you do? Soames. I called Bannister, and he came immediately. Holmes. Your servant, yes? You said he came in and felt faint. Soames. Correct. He had to sit down. He was so upset. Holmes. And you left to get him some water? Soames. That's right. Holmes. Would you mind getting this Bannister now? Soames. Certainly. Holmes. And do you mind if I take a look round your bedroom? Soames. Not at all. I'll be back in a moment. Soames exits left. Holmes, followed by Watson, enters the bedroom. He looks around. Watson. Not much to it, is there? Holmes. No, it's a very small room. The bed is too low to hide under, and there is no closet, just a chest of drawers. Watson. Anyone hiding in here would have just one option. Holmes. Precisely, behind the curtains. Now Holmes moves one of the curtains in front of the bedroom window to the side. Something on the ground catches his eye, and he bends over. Holmes. Hello, what's this? He picks something up off the ground and holds it up for Watson to see. Watson. Another lump of clay, and it's got a tidy hole in the middle of it. Holmes. A keen eye, Watson. I believe we are getting closer. Holmes pockets the lump of clay. Soames re-enters from left, trailed by Bannister, who is short and bald. He is also as white as a sheet, and sweating so much he must occasionally dab his forehead with a handkerchief. Holmes and Watson re-enter the office from the bedroom. Holmes. Mr. Bannister, I presume? Bannister nods. Holmes. I'm Sherlock Holmes. This is my associate, Dr. Watson. May I ask you a few questions? Bannister nods again. Holmes. Professor Soames tells me that, when he told you that someone had broken into his office and tampered with the examination papers, you grew faint. Is that correct? Bannister nods a third time. And you had to sit down. And please, don't simply nod again. Did you have to sit down right away? Bannister. I did, sir. I feared that I was going to lose consciousness. Holmes. So you were near where you are now, and you went to the chair. Which chair? The one at the desk, or the one by the window? Bannister. The one by the window, sir. Holmes. That's peculiar. Bannister. Sir? Holmes. The chair at the desk is closer. You felt faint, bypassed the nearest chair, and made your way clear across the room to the chair by the window. Any idea why? Bannister. No, sir. I didn't care which chair I sat in. Wasn't even thinking about it, to be honest. Perhaps I just zeroed in on that one by the window. Holmes nods. He paces. He strokes his chin. Bannister dabs his forehead. Holmes. There's no need to be so nervous, Bannister. Professor Soames has vouched for your honesty and decency. Bannister to Soames. Thank you, sir. Holmes. Professor Soames also mentioned that 3 students live in the building in rooms above this one. He named one Dowlett Ross. Who are the other 2? Bannister. One is named Giles Gilchrist, and the other is called Miles McLaurin. Holmes. And what can you tell me about them? Bannister. Giles Gilchrist is an excellent scholar and an athlete, tall and strong. Holmes. How tall? Bannister. Taller than you, by 5 or 6 inches, I'd say. Holmes. And I'm 6 feet tall. Very good. Continue. Bannister. He competes on the college track and field team, in the hurdles and in the long jump. He is a fine fellow. His father was Sir Jarvis Gilchrist, who lost all the family's money betting on horses when Giles was just 10, so Giles was left very poor, but he is hard-working and industrious. Holmes. Very good. And the other fellow, McLaurin? Bannister. McLaurin is a little fellow with glasses and red hair. I know Professor Holmes considers him to be one of the brightest students in Pembroke College. Soames. Quite true, though he lacks principles. He was nearly expelled after being accused of cheating in his first year. It could not be proven, though, so he remained. He was done little work most of the term, and he seemed rather worried about the exam. He has quite a temper as well. Holmes. Interesting. And the third fellow, Dowlett Ross, what kind of student is he? Soames. Steady and methodical. The Greek is his worst subject. Holmes. Very good. Thank you, gentlemen. Now, if it's not too much trouble, I would very much like to see these 3 students. Could you perhaps summon them to meet us here in an hour? Bannister. Certainly, sir. Bannister and Soames exit left. Watson turns to look at Holmes, who stares out the window. Watson. You've nearly solved the case, haven't you? Holmes. Perhaps, but I think a quick walk across campus for some fresh air will help me think more clearly. Come, we must be back here in an hour. Now Holmes and Watson exit left as well. Lights down. Act 3. Lights up. Professor Soames and Bannister stand by the office window. Near the desk stand the 3 students. Giles Gilchrist, lean and quite tall, has his hands in his pockets and his head down. Miles McLaurin, nearly a foot shorter than Gilchrist, red-haired and wearing glasses, paces angrily. Dowlett Ross, the shortest of the 3, reads to himself from a book and checks his watch. Now Holmes and Watson enter from the left. Everyone turns their attention to them. Holmes. Gentlemen, I thank you for coming to speak to me, pointing to each student. Mr. Gilchrist, Mr. McLaurin, and Mr. Rawls? The students all nod. Holmes. I'm Sherlock Holmes. This is my colleague, Dr. Watson. Watson, tipping his hat. Lads, good evening. Soames. Mr. Holmes and Dr. Watson have agreed to assist me in a most important matter. Holmes. That's correct. Has Professor Soames told you why I want to speak to you all? McLaurin. He has not, and I must say that I resent the interruption to my evening, Mr. Holmes. Holmes. Holmes? McLaurin. Whatever your name is, are you aware that we have a very important exam tomorrow? Holmes. I am. McLaurin. And do you know what people tend to do the evening before an exam? Holmes. Study? McLaurin. Correct. So what do you think I was doing when I was summoned down here to speak with you? Holmes. Logic suggests that you were studying. McLaurin. Bravo, Mr. Holmes. Your logic has served you well. I was studying, but I had to stop. So if it's all the same to you, I would very much like to get whatever this is over with so I can return to my studying. Holmes smiles. A moment passes. Holmes. Thank you, Mr. McLaurin. You may return to your studying. This catches McLaurin off guard. He waits a moment. Holmes nods towards the entrance to the office, and McLaurin hurriedly exits left. Holmes. And Mr. Ross, I see that you've not let our meeting interrupt your studies at all. Ross looks up from his book. Ross: I'm sorry, Mr. Holmes. The exam tomorrow is for a scholarship, and I very much want to win it. It will be a huge relief to not have to pay tuition next year. Holmes: I quite understand, Mr. Ross, and I wish you luck on the exam. You may return to your room to continue studying as well. Ross is also surprised by his abrupt dismissal, but he closes his book and exits left. Now Gilchrist, the only remaining student, begins to pace slowly. Watson: I'm not quite sure I understand, Holmes. You dismissed those two without hardly any questioning them at all. Holmes: My dear Watson, I didn't ask them here to question them. I simply needed to see them, and now that I have, I'm confident in the conclusion that I have drawn. Mr. Gilchrist, why don't you have a seat? Gilchrist nods and sits by the desk. Holmes: Mr. Bannister, what was in the chair by the window this afternoon? Gilchrist shoots a look at Bannister. Bannister gulps. Bannister: Sir? Holmes: I think you heard me, Bannister. What was in the chair? Bannister: I don't think... Gilchrist: My gloves. Holmes: Your gloves. Of course, you took them off so you could copy the passage, but you forgot to grab them when you had to go hide. Gilchrist nods sadly. Soames: Sorry, I'm not following entirely. So it was you, Mr. Gilchrist, who broke into my office this afternoon? Gilchrist: Yes, sir, I'm terribly sorry. I was just so tempted I couldn't resist. Soames: But how? Holmes: How did he do it? As I said earlier, anyone who saw the rolled-up papers on the desk could have logically assumed that they were parts of the exam, since they were the only sheets that you made the effort to conceal. Watson: But Mr. Gilchrist didn't come into the office. How could he have seen them? Holmes: He didn't need to come into the office to see them. Mr. Gilchrist is quite a bit bigger than me, and I stand 6 feet tall. The same height as... Watson: The office window. That's why you wanted to see all three students, to make sure Gilchrist was the only one tall enough to see through the window. Holmes: Very good, Watson. You're catching on. Mr. Gilchrist is tall enough to have seen the rolled-up papers through the window, realized that Professor Soames was out, and entered. Soames: Then he began to copy the sheets by the window so he could keep a lookout. Holmes: But since you came back to the building from a different direction, he didn't see you approach. When he heard you turn the doorknob, he had no choice but to hide in the bedroom. Watson: Behind the curtains. Holmes: The only place to hide, which is why we found a lump of clay there that matches the lump of clay that Professor Soames found on the table by the window. Soames: I see. But what was that clay? Gilchrist puts his head in his hands. Holmes: Dr. Watson, can you tell, I think? Watson looks at Holmes. He shakes his head. Watson: I'm afraid I cannot say what that clay was, Holmes. Holmes: Oh, Watson, will you ever begin to pay attention to the world around you? We just went on a walk around campus. Do you recall that? Watson: Of course. Holmes: And what did we pass on that walk? Watson: The library, the dining hall, the athletic fields, the... Holmes: Stop right there. What did we see at the athletic fields? Watson: The running track, grass, the long jump pit. The long jump pit. Holmes: Yes. What about it, Watson? Watson: Why, it was filled with the same type of dark clay that we found here in the office. Holmes: Exactly. Earlier, Mr. Bannister told us that Mr. Gilchrist competes on the college track and field team. I contend now that he was returning from practice in his athletic spikes this afternoon when he saw the opportunity to copy the exam. Athletic spikes being like cleats, the shoes with the spikes on the bottom. Watson: And when he came in, he tracked some of the clay from the long jump pit that had gotten stuck on his spikes. Holmes: Precisely. And when he recognized that, he took off his shoes, placing them on the side table there. Soames: But when he heard me open the door and had to dash into the bedroom to hide, he quickly grabbed the spikes, and one of their points made a tear in the leather. Holmes: Look at the two detectives at work. Now, just one question remains. Watson: What's that, Holmes? Holmes: Why did Mr. Bannister try to cover for Mr. Gilchrist? All eyes turn to Bannister. For the first time, he stands up tall and does not pat his head with his handkerchief. He speaks calmly and confidently. Bannister: Because I have known him my whole life. Soames: What's that now, Bannister? His whole life? He's only been at college for 2 years. Gilchrist. But Mr. Bannister worked for my family for decades. He was with us until I was 10, when my father gambled away all of our money, and we could no longer afford to pay him. Bannister. So when Professor Holmes summoned me after he realized that someone had broken into his office, I came in and immediately saw Mr. Gilchrist's gloves on that chair. Holmes. Then, recognizing the gloves, you pretended to feel faint, so you could sit on them and hide them from Professor Holmes. Bannister. Correct. I didn't know what else to do. In that moment I panicked. I couldn't bear the thought of Mr. Gilchrist being expelled if he was caught. You must understand, I was there the night he was born. I remember him learning to walk, learning to read. I helped teach him to ride a bicycle. Holmes. So you sat on the gloves, and when Professor Holmes went to get you some water... Gilchrist. He returned the gloves to me and told me to get out of the room. Holmes. You are a loyal man, Mr. Bannister. Gilchrist. And an honest and good one. He came to me earlier tonight and said that I must own up to my actions. I must take responsibility. And he's right, so I've made a decision. Gilchrist stands now. Bannister. What have you decided, Mr. Gilchrist? Gilchrist. I have decided to leave the university. I intend to join the police force in London. Holmes. An interesting decision, but why the police, Mr. Gilchrist? Gilchrist. I feel that joining the police will allow me to do some good in the world and earn an honest living. Also, I hope that, since I have not followed through on my rash decision to cheat on my Professor Holmes exam, I will not have my reputation tarnished as a result of my actions. Holmes. Well, Mr. Gilchrist, I appreciate your confession. Mr. Bannister, I respect your loyalty and your decency. Professor Holmes, I trust you are satisfied with this matter's result. Holmes. Quite. Thank you, Mr. Holmes. Holmes. It was my pleasure. Now, Dr. Watson, let us return to our rooms so that we can finish our business in Oxford and return to London as soon as possible. Watson. I'm right behind you, Holmes. Holmes and Watson start to leave, but Holmes stops briefly and turns to Gilchrist. Holmes. One more thing, Mr. Gilchrist. I wish you luck. I trust that a bright future awaits you in London, and perhaps our paths will cross again once you join the police force. Until then, remember this moment. You have fallen low, but I hope to see in the future that you have risen high again. Holmes and Watson exit. Lights down. End of play. And that was Sherlock Holmes and the Adventure of the Three Students. Thanks for joining us with that, everybody. Take care. See you next time.